The air in the 17th Precinct briefing room had a smell. It was a layered scent, built from decades of stale coffee, industrial-strength disinfectant that couldn't quite kill the ghost of old sweat and the faint metallic tang of tension. For Officer Maya Williams, on her first official day, it smelled like a cage. She took her seat at the back, her uniform crisp, her spine straight, a single dark island in a churning sea of white faces and blue wool. The room buzzed with the low-grade, pre-dawn energy of men who ran on caffeine and cynicism. They were a fraternity, their bonds forged in shared danger and locker room jokes. Maya felt their eyes on her, not as a colleague, but as an exhibit. The roll call droned on, a familiar liturgy of names and assignments. Sergeant Kowalski, a man whose gut strained against the buttons of his shirt, stood at the podium, his voice a gravelly monotone. Miller and O'Connell, you're on patrol in Sector Charlie. Keep an eye on the warehouse district. We've had reports of unsanctioned late-night deliveries. A voice, sharp and laced with a confident swagger, cut through the room. Sure thing, Sarge. Wouldn't want anyone getting things they didn't earn. The voice belonged to Officer Dean Miller. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He was the kind of handsome that turned sour with arrogance, his jawline sharp, his blue eyes holding a permanent glint of mockery. His gaze swept the room and landed, deliberately, on Maya. Speaking of which, Miller continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, looks like the department finally hit its diversity quota for the decade. The air didn't just go silent. It became heavy, thick with unspoken agreement. A few officers coughed to hide their snickers. Others suddenly found the scuff marks on their boots fascinating. No one met her eyes. No one said a word. It was a message, delivered with the precision of a sniper's bullet. You do not belong here. Maya's jaw tightened. Her academy training had prepared her for bullets, for knives, for the chaos of a street fight. It had not prepared her for this, the quiet, suffocating violence of exclusion. She kept her gaze fixed on Sergeant Kowalski, her expression a mask of professional calm. A new kind of silence fell, one of deference and caution. Captain Marcus Thorne stepped into the room. He wasn't a large man, but he occupied space with an unnerving stillness. In his late 40s, his uniform was immaculate, his head shaved clean, his face a landscape of calm authority. He was the new precinct commander, transferred in just a week ago, from a downtown precinct known for its aggressive internal reforms. Rumor had it he was a fixer, sent to clean up the notoriously insular 17th. He didn't speak. He simply walked to the side of the room, his dark eyes sweeping over the assembled officers. His gaze was not judgmental, not even cold. It was something far more unsettling. It was analytical. He was a biologist observing a new species, taking in every detail, every subtle shift in the ecosystem. His eyes lingered on Miller for a fraction of a second, then moved to Maya. For a brief moment, their gazes met. She saw nothing in his expression, no pity, no solidarity, no anger. She saw only acknowledgement. He had seen it. He had seen all of it. Then he turned his attention to Kowalski, giving a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Kowalski cleared his throat, his composure rattled. All right, that's it. Hit the streets. Be safe out there. The chairs scraped against the linoleum as the room emptied, the officers moving with a purpose they hadn't shown moments before. As Maya stood to leave, a hand landed gently on her shoulder. She turned to see a man in his 50s, his face weathered and kind, a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. His name tag read, Rizzo. Don't pay any attention to Miller, kid, he said, his voice a low paternal rumble. His bark is a whole lot worse than his bite. He's just a hothead trying to prove something. Maya offered a tight, grateful smile. Thank you, Sergeant. It's Frank, he corrected her. And you're riding with me today. I'll show you the ropes. Rule number 1 of the 17th. You do your job, you keep your head down, and you let the noise fade away. You'll be fine. She nodded, a small wave of relief washing over her. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe she just needed one ally. As they walked toward the exit, she glanced back. Captain Thorne was still standing in the now empty briefing room, looking at the tactical map on the wall. He wasn't looking at the streets or the patrol sectors. He was looking at the precinct itself, as if it were a puzzle he was just beginning to solve. An hour later, Maya was in the passenger seat of Patrol Car 17. David, the city of Chicago, blurring past her window. The rhythmic squeak of the wipers fought a losing battle against the morning drizzle. Beside her, Frank Rizzo drove with an easy, practiced familiarity, pointing out local landmarks and offering bits of advice. That diner there, best coffee on the south side. The old lady who runs it, Maria, she loves cops. Give her a smile, you get free refills for life, he said, a warm chuckle in his voice. He was disarmingly kind, telling stories of his early days on the force, making her feel less like an intruder and more like a rookie under his wing. He never mentioned Miller or the incident in the briefing room again, treating it like a bad dream that was best forgotten. But Maya couldn't forget. The sting of Miller's words was a hot coal in her gut. The image of the averted eyes was burned into her memory. Rizzo's advice to keep her head down echoed in her mind, and for the first time, it didn't sound like helpful advice. It sounded like a warning. It sounded like the first rule of a club she was never meant to join. The radio crackled to life, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. 17, David, available for a 10 to 53. Residential disturbance at 4512 West Archer. Neighbor reports sounds of a struggle. Possible domestic. Rizzo reached for the mic. 17, David. Show us en route. He glanced at her, his friendly demeanor replaced by a focused professionalism. All right, kid. Welcome to the job. Empt. As they accelerated, sirens wailing into life, Maya gripped the cold plastic of the door handle. She was finally doing what she had signed up for, running toward the danger, not away from it. But a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She was beginning to understand what Captain Thorne's single glance had told her. The most dangerous part of this job might not be on the streets at all. She was inside the fortress, but she had never felt more exposed. The house on West Archer was a small brick bungalow, its neat lawn marred by a single shattered window pane next to the front door. 2 patrol cars were already on scene, their lights painting silent, rhythmic splashes of red and blue across the quiet street. Inside, the living room was a mess of overturned furniture and scattered belongings. A young woman sat on the edge of the sofa, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while a uniformed officer took her statement. Her partner, a man with a fresh scratch on his cheek, was being questioned in the kitchen. It was a standard, depressingly familiar scene. Rizzo took the lead, his presence immediately calming the chaotic energy in the room. He spoke with the other officers, his voice low and authoritative. Maya stood back, observing, letting the scene soak in. Her job was to learn, to watch how a veteran navigated the delicate balance of enforcement and empathy. While Rizzo coordinated with the other units, Maya's attention was drawn to the broken window. The official narrative was simple. The man, in a rage, had broken things, including the window. But something felt off. She walked over, careful not to disturb the shards of glass on the floor. Most of the glass was on the outside, on the porch steps, consistent with a blow from inside. But it was too neat. She knelt down, her eyes scanning the frame. There, on the inner edge of the wooden sill, was a faint black scuff mark, the kind a rubber-soled boot might make if it was braced for leverage. Her gaze shifted to the porch. A large ceramic planter, heavy with soil, had been pushed a few inches away from the wall, right below the window. She stood up and walked over to Rizzo, waiting for a pause in his conversation. "Frank," she said quietly, "can I show you something?" He followed her to the window. "What is it, kid?" "The report will say he broke the window from the inside," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But look at the scuff mark on the sill. And that planter outside. Why would he move that heavy thing? I think he broke the window to make it look like part of the fight. The real entry point was probably an unlocked back door. This was a burglary, staged to look like a domestic." Rizzo stared at the window, then at the planter, then back at Maya. A slow smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He let out a low whistle. "Damn, kid, you got good eyes." He called over to one of the other officers. "Hey, Petrie, go check the back door in the alley. Williams thinks we've got a ghost." Petrie found the back door unlocked, its frame showing faint jimmy marks. A neighbor 2 houses down had security footage of a figure slipping down the alley 10 minutes before the 911 call. They had a new lead, a new suspect, and a completely different case, all because Maya had refused to accept the obvious. Back at the precinct, the adrenaline from the call had faded, replaced by the tedious reality of paperwork. Maya sat at a spare desk in the bullpen, a large, open-plan room filled with the clatter of keyboards and the murmur of phone calls. She focused on her report, detailing her observations with meticulous precision. "Well, Look who it is. Sherlock Holmes in the flesh. Maya didn't need to look up to know it was Dean Miller. He sauntered over, leaning against the edge of her desk, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Heard you solved the crime of the century out there," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Beginner's luck. Don't go thinking it means anything." Maya's fingers paused over the keyboard. She took a slow, steadying breath and kept her eyes on the screen. "I was just doing my job, Miller." "Oh, your job is to back up senior officers, not play detective." He shot back, his voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of a few nearby cops. "You got lucky, that's all." Before she could respond, a heavy hand settled on her shoulder. It was Rizzo, holding 2 steaming mugs. He placed one on her desk. "Easy, Dean," Rizzo said, his tone light and placating. He didn't look at Miller with anger, but with a kind of weary amusement. He put his arm around Maya's shoulder in a protective gesture. "She did good work. We all get lucky sometimes. Better to be lucky than good, right?" He winked at Miller, a gesture of shared understanding between 2 veterans. Miller's aggressive posture softened. He took a sip of his coffee, his point made. "Whatever," Miller muttered and walked away. Rizzo gave Maya's shoulder a final squeeze. "See? All noise. Just gotta know how to tune it out. Now drink your coffee before it gets cold." He walked back to his own desk, leaving Maya with the warm mug and a strange, unsettled feeling. She was grateful for his intervention, but the way he'd handled it, it hadn't felt like a defense. He hadn't challenged Miller, he had managed him. He had validated Miller's insult, it was just luck, while simultaneously comforting her. It was smooth, too smooth. She pushed the thought away, telling herself she was overthinking it. He was a veteran. He knew how to keep the peace. Hours later, in the sterile quiet of his second-floor office, Captain Marcus Thorne stared at his monitor. The Precinct's digital case management system was open on one side of the screen. On the other, he was reviewing security footage from the bullpen. He'd already read Maya's report. It was clean, concise, and demonstrated a level of deductive reasoning that was rare in a rookie. It confirmed his initial assessment. Officer Williams was sharp. Now, he watched the silent video of the interaction at her desk. He saw Miller's approach, the aggressive posture, the condescending lean. He saw Maya's disciplined stillness. Then he saw Rizzo. He rewound the footage and watched it again. His eyes focused entirely on the sergeant. He saw the placement of the hand on Maya's shoulder. He saw the placating smile directed at Miller. He saw the wink, the subtle gesture of collusion that Maya probably hadn't even noticed. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his fingers forming a steeple under his chin. Any other commander would see a veteran officer diffusing a situation, protecting a rookie from a bully. Thorne saw something else entirely. It wasn't protection. It was a performance. A carefully calibrated act of containment. Rizzo hadn't defended Williams. He had managed her, neutralized the conflict, and reinforced her reliance on him. He had positioned himself as her sole protector in a hostile environment, a classic tactic. Thorne had seen it before in other precincts he'd been sent to clean up. It was the first move a wolf makes when it wants to separate a lamb from the flock, by convincing the lamb that it, too, is a shepherd. He minimized the video feed and pulled up Rizzo's file. Decades of service. Commendations. A spotless record. Too spotless. Thorne's gaze drifted to the tactical map on his wall, the city laid out in a grid of sectors and beats. He wasn't just looking at a city anymore. He was looking at a web. And he had a strong suspicion that Sergeant Frank Rizzo wasn't just a thread in that web. He was one of the spiders. The next few weeks settled into a tense rhythm. Under Rizzo's wing, Maya learned the precinct's unwritten rules. She learned which corners to avoid, which dispatchers were reliable, and how to write a report that wouldn't attract unwanted attention. The open hostility from Miller and his crew subsided into a cold, watchful indifference, thanks largely to Rizzo's constant, low-key presence at her side. She felt safe, but it was the fragile safety of a guest in someone else's house. One rainy Tuesday, Sergeant Kowalski grumbled about the precinct's ancient file storage system and assigned Maya the thankless task of digitizing a backlog of old case files from the evidence overflow room, a dusty, windowless space in the basement. "Just scan and upload," he'd instructed, dropping a heavy box on a metal table. Rizzo and Miller's big narcotics bust from last spring. Command wants everything in the cloud. For hours, Maya worked in the quiet hum of the industrial scanner. The files detailed a major operation targeting a local drug distributor. It was a textbook case, weeks of surveillance, a confidential informant, a dramatic raid, and a significant seizure of drugs and cash. The arrest reports, written by Rizzo and Miller, were immaculate. She was on the last file, an inventory log of seized personal effects from the main suspect. Her eyes scanned the list. One leather wallet, a set of keys, cash, and one high-end smartphone, model number and serial number duly recorded. Something snagged her attention. She looked closer. The serial number listed for the phone was A1660 FG height J4 MP79. Her brow furrowed. A 1660 was the model identifier for an iPhone 7. The report was from May of this year. An iPhone 7 was a solid phone, but hardly the latest model a high-level dealer would be using. It was the serial number itself that felt wrong. The structure was off. The alphanumeric sequence just slightly clumsy. Out of pure, nagging curiosity, she tabbed open a browser on the dusty desktop computer and ran a quick search on the format of Apple serial numbers. They were typically 12 characters. The one in the report was 15, broken up by hyphens in a way she'd never seen. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in her stomach. It was probably nothing. A typo. Cops weren't IT guys. She finished scanning the last page and was about to box everything up when her eyes fell on the property bag itself, sitting on a shelf behind the table. It was a large, sealed plastic bag with the case number written on it in black marker. Inside, through the semi-transparent plastic, she could see the wallet, the keys, and the phone. She picked up the bag. The phone inside was not an iPhone 7. It was a newer model, sleek and black, with the distinctive 3-camera array of a Pro model. She didn't even have to check the serial number on the back. She knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that it wouldn't match the one in the report. The phone in the evidence bag was a high-end device. The phone documented in the official paperwork was an older, less valuable model. It was a discrepancy. A small, easily explainable discrepancy. But combined with the fabricated serial number, it felt like a deliberate lie. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This was the case that had earned Miller and Rizzo commendations. It was held up as a shining example of the 17th's effectiveness. She took the file upstairs, her mind racing. She found Rizzo in the break room, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Frank?" she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I think I found a typo in the narcotics case file, the one from last May." He turned, a warm smile on his face. "Oh yeah? What's up?" "The serial number for the suspect's phone. It's logged as an older model, but the phone in the evidence bag is a new one, and the serial number in the report seems made up." Rizzo's smile didn't falter. He took a sip of his coffee and chuckled, a deep, reassuring sound. "A typo, see? Told you the paperwork in this place is a mess. Miller probably fingered it when he was writing it up. You know how he is, all action, no attention to detail." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Listen, Maya, a piece of advice from an old salt. You're a rookie. The last thing you want is a reputation for poking holes in closed cases, especially successful ones. It makes the brass nervous. It makes guys like Miller defensive. You see a typo? You fix it and you move on. Don't go digging for treasure where there's only dirt. You understand?" His words were sensible. They were practical. They were the same kind of well-meaning advice he'd been giving her for weeks. But this time, they didn't feel reassuring. They felt like a door, being gently but firmly closed in her face. The casual dismissal of the discrepancy, the immediate pivot to a warning about her career, it was too quick, too practiced. "Yeah," she said, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, I get it. Just a typo. Good kid," he said, patting her on the back. "Now, forget about that dusty old file. Let's go grab a bite. My treat." She followed him out of the break room, the file still clutched in her hand. The cold knot in her stomach hadn't dissolved. It had hardened into a sharp, jagged stone. Meanwhile, in his quiet office, Captain Thorne stared at a different screen. It wasn't a case file. It was a complex flowchart he was building, a web of connections between certain officers in his precinct. He had an algorithm running in the background, a program of his own design that cross-referenced case files, patrol logs, and financial disclosures, searching for anomalies. A small red flag popped up on his screen. Anomaly detected. Case number 774. B2. Evidence log mismatch. Asset. Cellular device. He clicked on it. The details of the narcotics bust from last May filled the screen. He saw the official report, with the clumsily fabricated serial number. He saw the internal scan from the evidence room, showing a picture of the actual high-end phone in the bag. He saw the timestamp on the digital scan of the file. 1432, operator, M. Williams. His expression remained unchanged, but a new line of connection appeared on his flowchart, a dotted red line drawn from Frank Rizzo directly to the anomalous case file. He had suspected the rot was deep. He hadn't realized it would be this blatant, and he hadn't realized that the person who would stumble upon the first real crack in the wall wouldn't be one of his seasoned investigators. It would be the rookie, the one they were all trying so hard to control. He leaned forward, his focus absolute. The game had just changed, and Maya Williams, whether she knew it or not, was now standing at its very center. The typo haunted Maya. It was a dissonant note in an otherwise perfectly composed symphony, and the more she tried to ignore it, the louder it became. Rizzo's casual dismissal had the opposite of its intended effect. It planted a seed of suspicion that was now taking root. She found herself watching him, analyzing his easy camaraderie with the other officers, noticing the subtle deference they all showed him, a level of respect that went beyond mere seniority. The tension came to a head on a sweltering Friday afternoon. The air was thick and humid, promising a thunderstorm that refused to break. The precinct was on edge, the heat amplifying every minor irritation. A call came over the radio, the dispatcher's voice strained. All units in Sector Bravo, 10 to 33, officer needs assistance. Repeat, officer needs immediate assistance. Shots fired, 14th and Elm. The address was wrong. Maya knew it instantly. 14th and Elm was a quiet intersection of residential streets. The call they'd been monitoring moments before was a silent alarm from a liquor store at 40th and Elm, a known hotspot for armed robberies. It was a 20-block difference, a lifetime in a shots-fired situation. Dispatch, confirm address, Rizzo said into the mic, already accelerating. Alarm was at 40th and Elm. -17, David. The 10 to 33 call came directly from Officer Miller's radio. He stated 14th and Elm. Miller. A cold dread washed over Maya. He was supposed to be responding to the liquor store. He must have misspoken, Rizzo gritted out, weaving through the traffic. He's at 40th, heading there now. They arrived at the liquor store to a scene of controlled chaos. 2 officers were already securing a suspect on the ground. Miller was standing by his patrol car, his face pale, his breathing ragged. An empty shell casing lay on the asphalt near his feet. He'd gotten there alone, confronted the robber, and a shot had been fired. No one was hit, but the stark reality of what could have happened hung in the air. As the situation calmed down, Miller stormed over to their car, his eyes blazing with fury, aimed directly at Maya. "Where the hell were you?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "I called for backup. I gave the address." "You gave the wrong address, Dean," Rizzo said, stepping between them. "You said 14th, not 40th. "No, I didn't," Miller shot back, jabbing a finger toward Maya. "She must have relayed it wrong. She was on the secondary channel. She must have screwed it up." It was a blatant, desperate lie. Maya hadn't touched the radio. But in the high-stress aftermath of the incident, it was an easy accusation to make, an easy way to shift blame. "That's not true," Maya said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "I didn't relay anything. And—" "Dean, calm down," Rizzo said, putting a firm hand on Miller's chest. "Let's just take a breath. No one got hurt. That's what matters." Miller shoved his hand away. "She's incompetent. She almost got me killed." He turned and stormed off, kicking the tire of his car. The drive back to the precinct was thick with a suffocating silence. Rizzo didn't try to comfort her this time. He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Back at the precinct, the story had already spread, twisted and amplified by the rumor mill. Maya Williams, the rookie, had frozen up, relayed the wrong address, and left an officer stranded. She walked through the bullpen and felt the stares not of curiosity anymore, but of cold contempt. She was a liability, a danger. She found refuge in the cavernous, empty women's locker room. The silence was a relief. She sank onto a bench, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving her hollow and trembling. The accusation, the injustice of it, was a physical weight. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time since joining the force, she felt the hot sting of tears. It wasn't just the stress or the fear of the job. It was the terrifying realization of her own powerlessness. Miller hadn't just made a mistake. He had weaponized it against her. He had deliberately endangered himself and others to create an excuse to brand her as incompetent. It wasn't bullying anymore. It was sabotage. The walls weren't just excluding her. They were actively trying to crush her. A single, choked sob escaped her lips. The squeak of a shoe on the tile floor made her jump. She looked up, hastily wiping her eyes. Captain Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway. He hadn't entered, just stood on the threshold, his presence filling the space. He held a bottle of water in his hand. He didn't look at her with pity. His expression was as unreadable as ever, carved from granite. He took a step inside, his movements deliberate, and placed the water bottle on the bench beside her. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "What happened?" He looked her straight in the eye, his voice low, steady, and devoid of any emotion except a profound, cutting intensity. "Officer," he said, each word precise, "sometimes the greatest threat isn't what's in front of you. It's the lie they tell you about what happened. Trust your instincts." And then he was gone, his footsteps silent as he walked away. Maya stared at the water bottle, her heart still pounding. His words echoed in the silent room. Trust your instincts. He hadn't offered comfort. He had offered a weapon. He wasn't telling her it would be okay. He was telling her to fight back. She took a shaky breath, the tears receding, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. Her instincts had been screaming at her for weeks. The faked serial number. Rizzo's too smooth dismissals. Miller's escalating aggression. It wasn't a series of isolated incidents. It was a pattern. It was a conspiracy. She picked up the water bottle. The plastic was cool against her skin. For the first time, she felt a flicker of power in the suffocating darkness of the 17th precinct. The captain had seen her. He knew. And he had just given her permission to stop being a victim and start being a cop. Captain Thorne's words became Maya's mantra. Trust your instincts. The fear that had paralyzed her was slowly transmuting into a cold, hard resolve. She was done being managed, done being gaslit. The incident with Miller wasn't just an attack. It was a mistake on their part. It was a clumsy, desperate move that revealed their fear. They weren't just trying to push her out. They were trying to silence her. The question was, what did they think she knew? The answer, she felt with a chilling certainty, was locked away in the evidence room. The next day, she waited for the graveyard shift to begin, when the precinct was at its quietest, staffed by a skeleton crew. Citing the need to finalize a report, she got access to the bullpen's desktop computers. The official reason was plausible enough to avoid suspicion. Her real target was the evidence log. Her hands trembled slightly as she logged into the system. She navigated to the narcotics case file number 774B2. She needed more than just a visual discrepancy. She needed proof. According to regulations, high-value electronics seized as evidence had to be digitally cataloged. This involved photographing the item and logging its unique identifiers directly into the system. She found the entry for the phone. There was a single, slightly blurry photo of the older iPhone 7, just as it was described in the paper file. But where the digital log should have shown a system-verified serial number, there was only a manually typed entry, the same fabricated number from the report. It was a violation of protocol. A significant one. This was her leverage. This was the proof of a deliberate act, not a typo. Her heart pounded. Now, for the final, most dangerous step. She needed to see the real phone, the one in the evidence bag, and document it herself. She walked down to the basement. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows down the empty corridor. The evidence room was secured by a key code lock. As an officer, she had access, but the system logged every entry. There would be a record. There was no turning back. She typed in her code. The lock clicked open. Inside, the room was cold and smelled of dust and sealed plastic. Rows of metal shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with boxes and bags, each one a silent story of a crime. She found the shelf for case number 774B2. The evidence bag was right where she'd left it. With trembling fingers, she took out her service phone, her thumb hovering over the camera icon. She just needed one clear shot of the phone in the bag, a picture of the correct model, and a close-up of the real serial number etched on the back. That, compared against the digital log, would be undeniable. She raised her phone, centering the evidence bag in the frame. The plastic crinkled as she adjusted it for the light. Click. The sound of the camera shutter was deafening in the silence. She zoomed in, capturing a crystal-clear image of the 3-camera array and the serial number beneath it. Got it. Relief washed over her, so potent, it almost made her dizzy. She had them. She quickly put the evidence bag back on the shelf, exactly as she had found it, and turned to leave. and froze. The door to the evidence room was closing, pushed by a figure standing in the doorway. The figure stepped into the light. It was Officer Dean Miller. He wasn't smirking. His face was a mask of cold, predatory fury. His eyes were fixed on the phone in her hand. "Looking for something, Williams?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Maya's training screamed at her. Threat assessment. Maintain distance. Call for backup. But her radio was upstairs. She was alone, in a locked room in the basement, with the man who had tried to get her killed. "Just double-checking a file, Miller," she said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. She slowly lowered her phone, making sure not to make any sudden movements. "I bet you were," he said, taking a step closer. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? Had to keep digging." The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a random encounter. He had been watching her. They had been watching her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, backing away slowly until her back hit the cold steel of a shelf. "Don't you?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That phone, you think we're stupid? You think we wouldn't notice a nosy rookie sniffing around the biggest bust this precinct's had in years?" Her mind raced, piecing it all together. The typo. The escalating harassment. The accident on the street. It was all connected. It wasn't just about pushing her out because of who she was. It was about what she might find. The evidence tampering wasn't just a shortcut or a lazy mistake. It was the key to something much bigger. They had swapped the drug dealer's high-end, encrypted smartphone filled with contacts, ledgers, and secrets for a cheap, useless burner. They hadn't just seized evidence, they had buried it. And she had just dug it up. This was the first great twist in the silent play of the 17th Precinct. Miller's animosity wasn't personal prejudice, not entirely. It was the calculated aggression of a criminal desperate to protect his secret. Her identity, her status as an outsider, had simply made her the perfect target, the easy scapegoat. "Give me the phone, Williams," Miller commanded, his hand outstretched. He was bigger, stronger, and they were utterly alone. She clutched her phone tighter. The photos on it were her only weapon, her only chance. "No," she said, her voice clear and defiant. His eyes narrowed, the last pretense of civility gone. "I'm not asking again." He lunged. Miller's lunge was fast, but Maya's training was faster. Instinct took over. She dodged to the side, using the metal shelving as a shield. The corner of a box jabbed into her ribs, but she barely felt it. Miller, expecting her to cower, stumbled past, his momentum carrying him into a stack of evidence containers. "You're making a big mistake," he snarled, righting himself, his face flushed with rage. Maya didn't waste time with words. She scrambled for the door, her fingers fumbling for the keypad. He was on her in a second, grabbing her arm, his grip like a vice. He twisted, trying to wrench the phone from her hand. Pain shot up her arm. She cried out, dropping her phone. It skittered across the concrete floor, coming to a rest near the far wall. He shoved her hard. She stumbled backward, her head cracking against a steel shelf. The room swam, bright spots dancing in her vision. Through the haze, she saw Miller snatch up her phone. He glanced at the screen, saw the photos she had taken, and a look of grim satisfaction crossed his face. "Stupid," he muttered, his thumb moving to delete the images. Suddenly, the door to the evidence room flew open. What the hell is going on in here? Frank Rizzo stood in the doorway, his gun drawn and pointed low, his face a mask of shock and authority. He took in the scene in an instant. Maya on the floor, dazed, and Miller standing over her, holding her phone. Relief, pure and overwhelming, flooded through Maya. Frank. He was here. He would stop this. "Frank, thank God," she gasped, pushing herself up. "He attacked me. He's trying to destroy evidence." Miller spun around, his expression shifting from rage to panicked indignation. "She's lying. She broke into the evidence room. She's trying to frame me, plant something." And Rizzo's eyes darted between them, his face a canvas of conflict. He lowered his weapon slightly. "Dean, give me the phone now." Now. Miller hesitated, his jaw working. Then, with a look of resentment, he handed the phone to Rizzo. Rizzo took it, his gaze unreadable. He looked down at the screen, at the damning photos Maya had taken. He was silent for a long moment. The only sound in the room, the low hum of the ventilation system. This was it. The moment of truth. "Frank, look at the logs," Maya pleaded, her voice regaining its strength. "The serial number in the report is fake. That phone was swapped. Miller is dirty." Rizzo looked up from the phone, but his eyes didn't hold the righteous anger she expected. They held something else, something cold and calculating. He looked past Maya, directly at Miller, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A silent command. Then he turned his gaze back to Maya, and his expression softened into one of deep paternal disappointment. "Maya, Maya, Maya," he said, his voice laced with a sorrow that made her blood run cold. "I told you not to go digging. I warned you this would happen." His thumb moved across the screen of her phone. She heard the soft click of the delete confirmation. He was erasing the photos. He was erasing her proof. The world tilted on its axis. The relief she had felt curdled into sheer, suffocating horror. The man she had trusted, her mentor, her only ally, he wasn't her savior. He was Miller's. What are you doing?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I'm cleaning up a mess, kid," Rizzo said, his voice losing its warmth, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. He tossed her phone back to her. It landed on the floor with a clatter. "You were supposed to be smart. You were supposed to keep your head down, but you just couldn't let it go." Miller watched, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He understood. He had always been in on it. The second twist landed, far more devastating than the first. Miller wasn't the mastermind. He was the muscle, the attack dog. The true architect of the conspiracy, the man pulling the strings, was the one who had pretended to protect her from it all. Sergeant Frank Rizzo, the kind, fatherly veteran, was the wolf who had been wearing the shepherd's clothing since the very beginning. His protection wasn't a shield for her, it was a leash. He'd kept her close, not to keep her safe, but to keep her under control. "You're one of them," Maya breathed, the realization sucking the air from her lungs. Rizzo let out a weary sigh. "It's more complicated than that. This city, this job, it has its own set of rules. Rules you don't understand. I was trying to protect you from them, and from yourself." He took a step toward her, his expression hardening. "Now, you're going to walk out of here. You're going to forget everything you saw tonight. You're going to request a transfer to another precinct for personal reasons. If you do that, you get to keep your career. You get to keep walking around. If you don't..." He let the threat hang in the air, more menacing than any overt promise of violence. He turned to Miller. "Get back upstairs. Act normal. I'll handle this." Miller shot Maya a final look of contempt and walked out, his swagger fully restored. Maya was left alone in the cold, silent room with the man she had trusted completely. He was no longer Frank, a kind mentor. He was Rizzo, a stranger with cold, dead eyes, the puppet master who had just revealed his strings. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The system wasn't just broken. It was actively hunting her, and its most dangerous predator had been standing by her side all along. Panic was a physical thing, a cold, clawing creature in Maya's chest. She stumbled out of the evidence room, Rizzo's threat echoing in her ears. Every shadow in the dimly lit hallway seemed to lengthen, to twist into the shape of a threat. Every distant sound, a closing door, a ringing phone made her jump. The precinct, once a symbol of order, had become the belly of the beast. She made it to her car, her movements stiff and robotic. She locked the doors and sat for a long time, the engine off, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The horror of Rizzo's betrayal was a poison seeping into every part of her. He hadn't just been lying to her, he had been studying her. He knew her vulnerabilities, her dedication, her isolation. He had used her trust as a weapon against her. She was completely, terrifyingly alone. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Rizzo didn't threaten her again, not directly. He didn't have to. The pressure came from all sides, a subtle, suffocating net tightening around her. Her patrol assignments changed. No longer was she riding with Rizzo on the main beats. She was assigned a car by herself and given the precinct's dead-end calls, noise complaints in deserted industrial parks, welfare checks on addresses that didn't exist, reports of trespassers in sprawling, abandoned freight yards. They were sending her into the city's forgotten corners, isolating her, making her vulnerable. Each call was a new spike of anxiety. Was this the one? Was someone waiting for her in the shadows? Her equipment began to fail in small, deniable ways. Her radio would crackle with static at critical moments. The laptop in her car would freeze when she tried to run a license plate. Once, she returned to her vehicle after a call to find one of her tires slowly losing air from a nail that looked suspiciously new. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as bad luck, but the pattern was undeniable. They were chipping away at her confidence, her sanity, making her look incompetent and paranoid. The rumors intensified. Miller and his cronies spread the story that she was unstable, that she was cracking under the pressure. Cops she had once shared a brief friendly nod with now averted their eyes when she passed. She ate her lunch alone in her car. The silence in the locker room when she entered was absolute. They had successfully branded her a pariah. She thought about going to internal affairs, but Rizzo's influence was a chilling deterrent. He was a decorated sergeant with a spotless record and a network of friends throughout the department. What was her word against his? She was a rookie with a growing reputation for being troubled. She had no proof. He had deleted her only evidence. They would bury her in a mountain of paperwork and dismiss her as hysterical. One night, they sent her to a derelict warehouse on the far south side. The call was for a suspected vagrant. The building was a cavernous, skeletal structure, its windows like vacant eyes. She stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the oppressive darkness. The only sound was the drip of water from the leaking roof. Her radio crackled. 17 solo. Your location? The signal was breaking up. Dispatch, I'm at the warehouse on Kimbark, she said, her voice tight. Signal is weak. The radio hissed back static. She was alone, utterly disconnected. A cold sweat broke out on her brow. This was a perfect setup. She drew her weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs. She cleared the ground floor, room by empty, decaying room. Nothing. Just as she was about to leave, a floorboard creaked on the second floor above her. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "This is the police," she called out, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Show yourself." Silence. She began a slow, tactical ascent up a rusting metal staircase, her weapon held at the ready. Her flashlight beam swept across the second floor. It was a maze of debris and collapsed structures. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement at the far end of the room. A shadowy figure darted behind a stack of rotting pallets. Her training took over. She moved silently, using the debris for cover, her senses on high alert. This was it. This was the confrontation. She rounded the final pallet, her weapon aimed. "Police! Don't move!" A homeless man, rail-thin and terrified, cowered against the wall, his hands raised. He was unarmed, his eyes wide with fear. He'd just been trying to find a place to sleep. The drive back from the Kimbark warehouse left Maya feeling hollowed out. The incident with the homeless man was another one of Rizzo's games, a carefully constructed scenario designed to fray her nerves and make her look jumpy and overly aggressive. She had filed the report, her words clipped and professional. But she knew how it would be interpreted. Officer Williams drew her weapon on an unarmed civilian. The narrative they were building against her was becoming stronger every day. She was running out of time. Rizzo's unspoken threat hung over her, and she knew his patience wouldn't last forever. The accidents would get worse. Eventually, one of them would be permanent. Desperate, her mind raced, sifting through the events of the past few weeks, searching for a loose thread, anything they might have missed. She had no allies inside the precinct. She couldn't trust IA. She needed evidence, something concrete that existed outside the walls of the 17th, something Rizzo couldn't erase. Her thoughts kept circling back to her first week, to the burglary she and Rizzo had investigated. The one she had correctly identified was staged. The case had been handed off and forgotten, but one detail stuck with her: the kindness of the victim. He was an elderly immigrant, Mr. Al-Jamil, who owned a small electronics repair shop. He had been so grateful for her diligence, for her treating him with respect when others might have dismissed him. It was a long shot, a desperate grasp at a straw, but it was all she had. Maybe he had seen something. Maybe, in a neighborhood where people often distrusted the police, he might trust her. The next morning, off-duty and in civilian clothes, she drove to his shop. It was a small, cluttered space that smelled of solder and old wiring. Mr. said, Al-Jamil was behind the counter, a magnifying visor perched on his forehead as he worked on a circuit board. He looked up as she entered, and a warm smile of recognition lit up his face. "Officer Williams," he said, his voice pleased. "It is good to see you. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Al-Jamil," she lied, forcing a smile. "I was just in the neighborhood. I wanted to see how you were doing after the break-in." His smile faded slightly. "I am fine. They never caught the man, you know, but you were very kind. You listened. Not all are like that." This was her opening. She leaned on the counter, lowering her voice. "Mr. Al-Jamil, I know this might sound strange, but I'm working on something sensitive. It's about corruption. Cops who aren't doing their job right. And he watched her, his dark eyes intelligent and discerning. He didn't seem surprised. The neighborhood has eyes, officer, he said quietly. We see the patrol cars that drive by certain places and never stop. We see the ones that stop for a long time at places they shouldn't. Maya's heart leaped. What places? He hesitated, glancing toward the front window of his shop as if expecting to see a patrol car cruise by. He trusted her, but he was still afraid. I cannot be a witness, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I have a family, a business, but you have an honest face. He made a decision. There is a warehouse, a block from here, on Racine. It used to be a meatpacking plant, closed for years, but it is not empty. Cars come and go at all hours, expensive cars, and sometimes a patrol car sits at the end of the block. It just sits there, watching, protecting. Which patrol car? Maya asked, her voice tight. Mr. Al-Jamil shook his head. I do not know the numbers, but the officer who drives it, he is a big man. Older. Everyone knows him. They say he is the one who decides who gets bothered and who gets left alone. Rizzo. It had to be Rizzo. Thank you, Maya said, her voice thick with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Al-Jamil. You have no idea how much this helps. No one will ever know we spoke. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared risk. That night, Maya didn't sleep. She sat in her car, parked 2 blocks away from the Racine warehouse, watching. For hours, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the city at night. Then, just after 2 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the warehouse's loading bay. 2 men got out, unlocked a heavy metal door, and disappeared inside. A few minutes later, they emerged, carrying heavy-looking duffel bags, and drove off. It was exactly as Mr. Al-Jamil had described. This was their hub. This was where the real business happened, far from the prying eyes of precinct evidence logs. The next night, she came back, but this time she was prepared. Dressed in dark clothing, she slipped down the alley behind the warehouse. The building was a fortress, but years of neglect had created weaknesses. She found a rusted-out window on the ground floor, its glass long gone, covered by a loose piece of plywood. Her heart pounding, she pried the plywood back and slipped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, but underneath it was another, sharper scent, the chemical odor of cocaine. She moved through the darkness, using the faint light from her phone screen to guide her. The main floor was a vast, empty space, but in a corner office, she found what she was looking for. Stacked against a wall were dozens of boxes, all bearing the logo of a legitimate shipping company, the perfect cover. But one box was open. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were bricks of cocaine. Her hands shook as she took a picture. This was it. This was real. Then she saw something else, sitting on a grimy desk next to the boxes. It was a simple spiral notebook, a ledger. She flipped it open. It was filled with dates, weights, and payment amounts. But it wasn't the numbers that made her breath catch. It was the columns designated for payouts. Most were just initials. But one entry, from last week, was clearer. 10K, M Uniforms. 25K, R Logistics. M for Miller, R for Rizzo. She snapped photos of the ledger, page after page, her hands trembling so hard she had to take each shot twice. This was it. This was the proof that existed outside their control. The evidence they couldn't erase. She had the gun, the motive, and the money trail. She had everything she needed to burn their world to the ground. Now, she just had to get out of the warehouse alive. The photos burned a hole in Maya's phone. She had the evidence irrefutable, damning proof that existed outside the precinct's corrupt ecosystem. But possessing it made her the biggest threat Rizzo and his crew had ever faced. She knew they wouldn't just try to scare her anymore. They would try to eliminate her. She had one move left, a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. She didn't go home. She didn't go to internal affairs. She drove straight to the 17th precinct. It was just before dawn, the shift change imminent. The building was quiet. She bypassed the locker room, bypassed the bullpen, and walked with a steady, determined stride to the second floor. Her destination, the office of Captain Marcus Thorne. She didn't knock. She threw the door open and stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Thorne was at his desk, a single lamp casting a pool of light on a stack of files. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but not surprised. It was as if he had been waiting for her. "Captain," she said, her voice tight but firm. "We need to talk." Before he could respond, she strode to his desk and placed her phone down. The screen lit up with the picture of Rizzo's ledger. "This is everything. The warehouse, the drugs, the payouts. Rizzo, Miller, they're running the whole operation." Thorne looked down at the phone, his gaze lingering on the photo. He didn't speak, he just studied the image, his face a mask of calm concentration. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Was he processing it? Was he on her side? Or was she showing her hand to the final boss? The office door burst open again. Rizzo and Miller stood there, their faces contorted with fury and panic. Rizzo must have had someone watching her, someone who had reported her mad dash to the precinct. "There she is." Rizzo's voice was a venomous snarl, all pretense of the kindly mentor gone. He pointed a trembling finger at Maya. "Captain, she's lost it. She assaulted an officer and broke into a private facility. She's fabricating evidence, trying to take us all down with her paranoid delusions." Miller stepped forward, his fists clenched. "She's out of control. She needs to be in a psych ward, not a uniform." They advanced into the room, trapping her between them and the captain's desk. This was their endgame, to discredit her so completely, to paint her as so dangerously unstable that no one would ever believe her. Maya stood her ground, her eyes locked on Thorne. It was all up to him now. Her entire life, her career, her gamble, it all came down to this one man. Thorne leaned back in his chair, the picture on Maya's phone still glowing. He looked from Rizzo's furious face to Miller's thuggish posture, and then finally to Maya, who stood defiant and alone. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "Thank you, Officer Williams," he said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the venomous accusations. "I've been waiting for this." Rizzo's face went slack with confusion. "What?" Thorne reached under his desk and pressed a small, discreet button. A low hum filled the room, and a section of the wall opposite his desk, which had looked like a simple corkboard, lit up. It was a massive, high-resolution screen. On it, a video began to play. It was security footage, crystal clear, from a camera positioned in a dark corner of an old dingy bar. The timestamp was from weeks ago. The subjects were Frank Rizzo and Dean Miller. The audio was perfect. "She's getting too close to the narcotics file." Rizzo's voice echoed through the office. "We need to ramp it up, make her look unstable. The wrong address gag during the next hot call should do it. Fray her nerves, make her look incompetent. No one will believe a word she says after that." Rizzo stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Miller was frozen, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. This was the final, devastating twist. Thorne hadn't just been observing. He had been investigating. He had been one step ahead of them the entire time. "I was assigned to this precinct for one reason, Sergeant," Thorne said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "To dismantle the criminal enterprise you've been running for the last 10 years. You and your crew have been under surveillance since the day I arrived." He gestured to Maya's phone on his desk. "I knew about the drugs, I knew about the protection rackets. What I didn't have, what I needed, was a look inside your internal ledger. A look you would never have given me. But you gave it to her." He stood up, his presence seeming to fill the entire room. "You underestimated her. You saw a rookie, an outsider, an easy target. You never imagined she had the integrity and the courage to fight back, to do the one thing none of the rest of you would ever do, her job." As if on cue, the office door swung open for a third time. But it wasn't another dirty cop. It was a team of plain-clothed officers, badges hanging from their necks. The words "Internal Affairs" were emblazoned on their tactical vests. They were Thorne's people, brought in from outside the precinct, an untouchable unit he had kept waiting in the wings. The lead IA officer, a stern-faced woman, looked at Thorne, who gave a single, sharp nod toward Rizzo and Miller. "Frank Rizzo, Dean Miller," she said, her voice ringing with authority as her team moved in, producing handcuffs. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, distribution of narcotics, and obstruction of justice." Rizzo stared at Thorne, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and dawning horror. His empire, built over decades in the shadows of the 17th precinct, had crumbled to dust in less than 5 minutes. Miller, the swaggering bully, looked small and pathetic as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. The fortress had been breached. The silent blue wall had finally come crashing down, and the one who had thrown the final stone was the rookie they had all tried to break. The fallout was a controlled detonation that shook the 17th precinct to its foundation. News of the arrest spread through the building like wildfire. In the hours that followed, Thorne's IA team moved with surgical precision, taking more than a dozen officers into custody. Some were cogs in Rizzo's machine, others were just guilty of looking the other way. The precinct's old guard was dismantled before the sun had fully risen. The bullpen, once a bastion of simmering hostility toward Maya, was now a cavern of stunned silence and nervous glances. The power structure had been inverted. The pack that had hunted her was now caged, and she was the one left standing. Later that morning, Captain Thorne called for a mandatory all-hands briefing. The room was packed, but the energy was completely different. The arrogance and cynicism were gone, replaced by a tense, uncertain sobriety. Maya stood at the back, just as she had on her first day. But this time, no one dared to meet her eyes, not out of contempt, but out of a mixture of awe and shame. Thorne stood at the podium, his presence more commanding than ever. As of 0600 this morning, he began, his voice devoid of triumph. This precinct is under new management. The era of looking the other way, of protecting your own at the expense of the badge, is over. His gaze swept the room, landing on each officer, demanding their attention. For weeks, one of your own has been operating under immense pressure. She was targeted, harassed, and endangered. She was isolated and tested. And while many of you chose silence, she chose integrity. While many of you chose to protect a corrupt system, she chose to honor the oath you all swore. He looked directly at Maya. Officer Williams demonstrated a level of courage and resilience that I have rarely seen. She is the standard. She is the example of what a police officer in this city should be. Let that be understood. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of his words. It was a public vindication, a shield forged for her in the fire she had just walked through. Life didn't magically become easy. In the weeks that followed, some officers treated her with a newfound, almost fearful respect. Others avoided her, their resentment palpable. She was the woman who had broken the blue wall, and that was a label that would follow her for the rest of her career. But it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a badge of honor. She walked the halls of the 17th with her head held high, no longer an intruder, but a pillar of the new foundation being built. A month after the arrests, Thorne called her into his office. The chaos had subsided, and a new sense of order was taking hold. "Close the door," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. She sat, a quiet confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is taking the case," he informed her. "Rizzo is cooperating in exchange for a lighter sentence. He's giving up everyone, all the way up the supply chain. The evidence you secured from that warehouse, it's going to put people away for a very long time." "That's good news, Captain," Maya said. "It is," he agreed. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm putting together a new unit here at the 17th, a precinct integrity task force. Its job will be to proactively investigate corruption, to find the rot before it spreads. It needs to be led by officers who can't be bought, intimidated, or broken." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I want you on that team. I want you to help me lead it." The offer hung in the air, a testament to how far she had come. She thought of her first day, of the humiliation and the isolation. She thought of the fear in the evidence room, the crushing betrayal, the lonely nights spent wondering if she would survive. She had walked through the fire and emerged not just unscathed, but forged into something stronger. She looked at Thorne, the man who had given her a weapon instead of pity, the man who had trusted her to fight her own battles until the time was right. She saw not just a commander, but a true leader. A slow, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I accept, Captain," she said, her voice clear and steady. "When do we start?" He smiled back, a rare, fleeting expression of profound respect. "We already have." Maya stood and walked to the window of his office, looking down at the city streets below. The sun was bright, glinting off the windshields of passing cars. The sounds of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the life no longer felt menacing. They felt like a promise. Her fight at the 17th was over, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her real work had just begun. She was no longer a rookie lost in the dark. She was a guardian standing in the dawn, ready for whatever came next.